My name is Tang Fong. I woke up in a small hot hut with a splitting headache and wounds covering half my body. Two sets of memories lived inside my skull. I was still learning to separate them. In the first life, I had been a rocket scientist, 30 years old, moderately successful, killed when my car brakes failed on the way home from the worst blind date of my life. The woman had treated me like furniture. The universe, apparently, agreed with her assessment and removed me from the situation permanently. In the second life, I was 19, living in the Great Shang dynasty, in a body that smelled like blood and dried medicinal herbs. My younger brother Tang Yun was beside me, clutching my hand with the relieved desperation of someone who had been sitting vigil for days. When I finally focused on his face, he started crying, which told me everything I needed to know about how close things had been. Over the next few hours, I pieced it together. The man whose body I now inhabited had done something extraordinary and nearly fatal. He had killed the leader of the Qing Fong bandits with a thrown stone, protecting the village's grain supply. The bandits were infamous across the region for cruelty and collective punishment. I had been unconscious for 3 days while the village held its breath, and now that I had woken up, the situation was straightforward and terrible. The bandits would come. Their mourning period would end, and they would come for blood. The clan elder, Grandpa San, had made a pragmatic decision. A straw mat would be prepared and a death announced. If the bandits believed I had already died from my wounds, they might accept the loss as settled. It was the kind of plan that only works once, and only if everyone holds the lie perfectly. I lay in the small hot hut and thought about what I was actually facing. In my previous life, I had built rockets. I had a mechanic's precision, a scientist's habit of breaking problems into components, and 30 years of accumulated knowledge about materials, physics, and human psychology. In this life, I had a wooden bow, a stone knife, a few clay bowls, and an empty grain jar. The bandits had already stolen everything else. Difficulty setting, maximum. My aunt arrived before I had fully decided on a plan, moving quickly and carrying food. She was direct about it. We had to leave tonight. Both of us, together, before anyone from Qing Fong found out I was still breathing. Our parents had been killed by those same bandits years ago. She had no intention of watching the family line end in this hut. Grandpa San said the same thing and pressed a string of copper coins into my hands when I tried to refuse. The gesture nearly undid me. These people had almost nothing, and they were giving it away to keep a young man alive. "Can I take others?" I asked. He agreed without hesitation. I had Tang Yun gather 5 friends, Titan, Danu, Ergu, Zayao, and Hosi. They arrived confused and slightly frightened, which was the correct response to being woken at an unusual hour and told to pack. Titan made a joke about the fake burial, which was either excellent coping or genuine irreverence. I couldn't tell which. I looked at these young men and understood that whatever I built in this life, I was building it from here. From them. "I'm asking you to follow me into an uncertain future," I told them. "I won't pretend I know exactly what's coming. But I have a plan, and I'm asking for your trust." None of them said no. After they left to gather their things, Tang Yun sat beside me with the worried expression that would become familiar over the coming weeks. "Where will we actually go?" he asked. "How do we feed this many people?" I smiled at him. "Everyone thinks I'm running. I'm not running." He stared at me. "What?" "We're not leaving Tang Village. Not for good." The confusion on his face deepened considerably. I told him to pack while I went to find Doctor Who. Doctor Who was the village's only literate person, a mysterious man who had lived among us for years as a deliberate outsider. The bandits tolerated him because they needed his medical skills, which gave him a particular kind of safety that nobody else in Tang Village possessed. When he arrived and saw how quickly my wounds were healing, genuine surprise crossed his face. "You should still be bettered in," he said. Something had changed when I crossed over. My body felt stronger than it had any right to be. My hearing extended further than before. When I moved with more authority than the original Tang Fong's farm-built muscles should have allowed. I had no explanation for it beyond the obvious one. Whatever had brought me here had also altered the vessel I arrived in. I told Doctor Who I didn't want medicine for healing. "Then what do you want?" The strongest poison you have. He looked at me for a long time. He had known the original Tang Fong as a kind person, reckless and impulsive sometimes, but fundamentally decent. The request didn't fit the picture. I explained my reasoning. Without money or power, Tang Yun and I were simply targets who moved from place to place. Here in the village, we had something no amount of running could provide. Unity built from shared history, loyalty built from shared ancestors, and an ancestral hall that served as both symbol and substance of everything we were. That unity was the only real advantage we had. Running away abandoned it. I was not going to fight the Qing Fong bandits with kindness. He gave me a small bottle of snake venom, pressed it into my palm, and told me to be careful with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering everything he thought he knew about me. That night, Tang Yun and I waited under a brilliant sky, while I privately wondered whether anyone would actually show up. They did, all five, arriving together in the darkness, with Iron Egg's father, Uncle Wu, who brought a strong mat for the fake burial, and the particular expression of a man who has decided to trust something he doesn't fully understand. He left his son in my hands with a bow and a few words I won't forget. We bowed back, and then we slipped away into the mountains toward a cave I had identified during my earlier reconnaissance. The fake funeral was held the following day. Many people wept. The performance was convincing. It held for 5 days. Then the Qing Fong bandits arrived. I watched from concealment as they rode into the village. The new leader was on horseback, moving with the confidence of someone who had decided that the purpose of this visit was demonstration rather than negotiation. They began beating villagers immediately. They burned houses. They took grain. When someone mentioned the women of the village, the leader made a note of it for later. The village elder knelt in the dirt and begged for mercy. The bandit leader laughed and told him that one dead man wasn't adequate payment for their chief. I watched Grandpa San's face as he knelt there, and something settled in me that had been uncertain since I woke up in this body. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, these people were not going to continue paying this tribute. The third leader's command sent his men into a frenzy. 200 villagers, old people, children, women, were being systematically beaten by 50 or 60 bandits who had stopped pretending this was about grain. Uncle Wu knelt beside Grandpa San in the dirt, both of them bowing repeatedly, trying to find some lever of appeal that would stop it. I came out of the grass. I was wearing the camouflage I'd spent the past 5 days constructing from vines and leaves, clothing that disappeared against green terrain the way nothing else in this era could manage. My face and hand were covered in sap that matched the color of the surrounding vegetation. To someone looking from a distance in poor light, I was approximately invisible. The third leader never saw me coming until I was already pulling him off his horse. He hit the ground hard, and I was on top of him immediately, driving a short wooden dagger into him in quick succession. Pain and shock overrode his size advantage for the critical first seconds. When he recovered enough to throw me off and swing his blade, I was already retreating toward the grass. Wounding him in a surprise attack was the objective. Facing him directly in open combat was not. I signaled from the tree line. Tang Yun's arrow came from less than 5 meters away and struck the third leader's bare arm. Then Denu and Ergu and Xiao materialized from the grass on both sides. All of us in our camouflage, all of us with bamboo blowpipes loaded with thorn darts soaked in Doctor Who's snake venom. We aimed at his face and blew. The darts landed. Multiple impacts. The venom began its work. The third leader was a large man with serious combat experience, and even badly wounded, he was dangerous. He charged forward with his eyes full of fury, blood already beginning to affect his coordination. But fury and size and experience have limits when the venom is spreading and the target keeps retreating. He made it perhaps 10 steps before his legs stopped cooperating. He went down. He didn't get back up. In the grain drying yard, the collapse of their leader produced the exact effect I needed. Several bandits recognized me despite the green camouflage and the sap on my face. They had been among those who beat me the last time. Seeing me alive, covered in vines, emerging from the grass like something that had grown from the ground itself, they screamed. Ghosts! Mountain spirits! Two of them fainted on the spot. Others lost control of their bodies in ways that soaked through their clothing. The bandits who had been systematically brutalizing 200 helpless villagers a minute earlier were now stumbling over each other, trying to exit the yard from multiple directions simultaneously. Danu had taken the third leader's sword. He wielded it with the particular fury of someone who has been suppressed for a long time and has just discovered that suppression is optional. He was not precise, but he was relentless, and he was terrifying, and the bandits in his path prioritized distance over dignity. Tang Yin exhausted his arrows and switched to the blowpipe. The others did the same. The darts were gone quickly, replaced by the spears the bandits had dropped in their panic. In a short time, the yard had reversed entirely. When the air cleared enough to see clearly, 14 bandits were dead. 48 were captured and bound with straw rope. 5 of our own people had not survived, Aunt Shi among them, and Hanzi and Uncle Dashin. I stood in the yard with the smell of blood in the air and the particular cold feeling that follows violence, even when the violence was necessary, and I allowed myself 30 seconds to be a 30-year-old man from a world where this didn't happen. Then I want to speak with the elder. That evening, the entire village, nearly 400 people, gathered in the ancestral hall. The elders sat at the front. Uncle Wu stood near Grandpa San. Doctor Hu arrived, uninvited, and was welcomed immediately. Tang Xian, 17 years old and newly brave, suggested that since they'd already killed 2 leaders, they might as well kill the third one and absorb Qing Fong village entirely. His father removed a sandal. Danu, who had been quiet since the fighting ended, stood up with the sword still in his hand and said something that surprised everyone, including me. He talked about fairness, about how fairness was something that had to be taken by force in a world that wouldn't offer it voluntarily, and about how they had all spent decades accepting the opposite of fairness while waiting for someone else to fix it. He'd only followed me into the mountains for 5 days. The person who came back was different from the one who left. I let him finish, then stood when the elder called on me. Fourth grandfather is right, I said. Qingfang village won't forgive this. They don't have the luxury of letting it go and keeping their reputation. Whatever we want to believe about negotiation, that path is closed. I looked around the hall, but their numbers are misleading. They just lost 2 leaders. The man who's left is cautious, more dangerous in some ways, but also more hesitant. He won't move immediately. He'll spend time consolidating his position inside Qingfang first, and that time belongs to us. I described the approach. Defensive preparation rather than offensive action. Tunnels, traps, mechanisms. Meet them on ground we chose rather than ground they chose. They will come to us, I said. When they do, every step they take inside Tang village will be our decision, not theirs. The young men's faces changed. Grandpa Sen looked at me the way he'd looked at me when I was a child, doing something unexpectedly competent, except the scale was larger now. Doctor Who watched all of it from his stool in the corner with an expression I couldn't quite read. I explained to the assembled hall that I knew the art of iron making. The silence that followed was different from other silences. Ironworking was a state secret in the Great Shang dynasty, controlled at the level of national security, forbidden to common people in ways that carried execution as the penalty. For a farmer's son from Tang village to claim knowledge of it was either madness or something that required a very good explanation. I gave them the explanation I prepared. When I had been at the edge of death, I told them the king of the underworld had heard my suffering and had not taken me. A spirit had been sent to teach me certain skills. The instruction had been thorough. It was completely untrue. What I actually possessed was 30 years of modern engineering knowledge, a mechanic's intimate familiarity with materials and processes, and a clear memory of how pre-industrial metalworking had been developed. But the explanation I gave was one that fit the world they lived in and couldn't be falsified by anyone who survived the attempt. Titan clapped his hands. That must be it. Otherwise, how could he suddenly know all of this? The elder made it formal. No one speaks of this outside the village. If the government learns we have ironworking knowledge, the bandits from Qingfang become the least of our problems. Everyone in the room understood exactly what he meant. Grandpa sent straight in his spine. Xiaofeng, I leave the rest to you. No man of the Tang family is a coward. We'll fight them at our own doorstep. I bowed. Don't worry, granduncle. After the meeting ended, I took the third leader's sword from Danu, temporarily, and demonstrated the 8 styles of breaking wind at the grain drying yard. It was a set of sword forms I had learned during a school event honoring revolutionary ancestors, simple enough to be memorized quickly, but containing real principles about balance, momentum redirection, and targeting vulnerable points. I performed each form slowly, named it clearly, and repeated it. 30 young men stood in the yard with wooden spears, trying to replicate what they'd seen, their voices echoing the 8-line chant as the sun went down. By the 3rd pass, their movements had begun to find their own rhythm. By the 10th, they were something that resembled a unit. I gave the sword back to Danu when we finished. He was the right person for it. The preparation work took 5 days. Under my direction, the men of Tang village, and eventually the women hiding in the back mountain, worked continuously. Pits were dug at precise intervals along the main paths, lined with sharpened bamboo stakes and filled with thorny vines. Hidden rope mechanisms were installed in the stone houses. Catapults were built from bent timber and lashed rope. Stones and logs were positioned on the hillsides above the natural mountain pass leading to the ancestral hall. Signal fires were arranged on the ridgeline. Without proper iron tools, progress was slow, and I recalibrated my expectations accordingly. But everyone worked, the elders, the children, the women who were supposedly in the back mountain for safety. Clay molds were shaped. Stone edges were ground sharp. The resources in the mountains were abundant, and we used all of them. On the 7th day, the scouts who watched the approaches came back at a run. The Qingfang village response to the death of their leader and 3rd leader had been chaotic in ways I hadn't fully predicted. In the stronghold, a power struggle had erupted between the 2nd leader, a scholarly, cautious man who had moved quickly to consolidate authority, and a scarred enforcer named Scarface, who had been close to the original chief and resented the transition. The 2nd leader, rather than respond directly to Tang village, had used the crisis skillfully. He maneuvered Scarface into revealing connections to the Hu family landlords, framing him publicly as a traitor and eliminating his most significant internal rival in the process. None of this was known to me yet. What reached Tang village was simpler. The bandits were coming, and there were more of them than the village had ever faced. The signal fires on the hilltops were lit. The one-eyed dragon was not a Qingfang bandit. He was a separate operator entirely, a minor leader from one of the smaller gangs who had recruited 6 other groups with promises of reward and access to Qingfang village's membership, backed by weapons supplied by Lord Hu, the landlord who apparently controlled significant portions of Qingfang's operations from a comfortable distance. He had assembled 700 or 800 men. I had 30-some young villagers in vine-woven camouflage, 1 horse, a collection of wooden weapons, bamboo blowpipes, and terrain I had spent 5 days turning into a series of deliberate problems. Tang village's geography was a natural advantage we hadn't previously thought to use. The settlement sat in a U-shaped valley between 2 mountain ranges, with the village entrance at the open end and the ancestral hall at the closed end. The single-man approach was a narrow path with steep slopes on both sides. There was no good way to move a large force through it quickly, which meant a large force couldn't bring its size advantage to bear all at once. When the bandits arrived at the grain drying yard and found themselves looking at 30 young men in strange armor formed into coordinated groups of 3, the first wave lost 60 or 70 men before they understood what was happening. The one-eyed dragon arrived with the main force and found his advance unit already defeated and lying on the ground. Goldrat looked at the men in vine armor and their organized movements and said what everyone was thinking. These aren't ordinary villagers. The one-eyed dragon, whose judgment had been clouded by overconfidence, ordered the attack anyway. The bandits who rushed into Tang village discovered that the village had been redesigned. The stone houses contained falling weighted stakes, hidden thorns, and wasp nests inside grain jars. The paths were interrupted by covered pits with sharpened stakes at the bottom. The hillsides had trip ropes connected to rolling logs. Every alley had a concealed rope that could be pulled from safety. The young men in camouflage moved through it all without hesitation, appearing and vanishing, never engaging directly when they could engage indirectly. Danu rode the horse taken from the dead third leader, fitted with vine armor, and operated around the perimeter with a chain hammer made from a large stone tied to vines. He had taught himself to ride during the preparation days, acquiring bruises that covered most of his body in the process. On horseback, he was something the bandits couldn't catch and couldn't ignore. Jean Lahu, one of the gang leaders, led his men into a stone house and died under a weighted stake that crushed his chest before he finished examining the grain jar. Within an hour, most of the bandits who had rushed into the village were wounded, and none of them had found anything worth taking. Those who reached the front of the formation had received the worst of it. The one-eyed dragon, his numbers down from 7+100 to something under 500 and still dropping, ordered a retreat from the scattered house-to-house fighting. He reorganized what remained and announced the new target: destroy the ancestral hall. Smash the shrine that gave Tang Village its identity. It was the right tactical instinct given what he understood about this world. The ancestral hall was the center of everything for a clan village. Destroy it, and you destroy the will to resist. He didn't know what we had prepared at the mountain pass. Uncle Wu was waiting at the ancestral hall with over 100 men. The elders, the stronger women, the boys who were too young for the camouflage units, but old enough to throw things accurately. Behind them were 2 catapults loaded with clay jars filled with tong oil, and large stones arranged in nets on the hillside above, and buckets of water placed at intervals for fire management. I watched from a hillside as the bandits gathered themselves and began moving toward the pass. Signal to the brothers across the ridge, I said. Tang Yun lit the signal fire. The logs and stones came from both sides simultaneously. They moved with the particular momentum of objects that had been waiting on slopes for 5 days, gathering speed as they descended, snapping trees and redirecting unpredictably, and producing the kind of noise that reaches the body before it reaches the ears. The bandits in the pass had nowhere to go. The path was too narrow and the debris was coming from both sides. Those who survived the initial impact found the pass blocked behind them. The one-eyed dragon, watching from further back, shouted for his men to find other ways through. But the hillsides were covered with the thorny vines we'd spent days anchoring to stakes and rocks, and the men who tried to climb found that vine thorns at close range on steep terrain are a specific kind of miserable that nobody was willing to endure for long. Uncle Wu's catapults launched the oil jars into the prepared haystacks in the square before the ancestral hall. The fire that followed was significant, controlled by the fire breaks we dug, illuminating the trapped bandits with considerable clarity. The rocks came from above. The fire came from below. The men in camouflage harassed from the sides. The catapults switched to head-sized stones. The one-eyed dragon finally charged, red-eyed and furious, determined to at least bloody someone with his sword. Uncle Wu put a wooden arrow through his good eye from the hillside above the pass. The dragon tumbled down the slope. The remaining bandits knelt. Guan Ernu surrendered first, with a face swollen from wasp stings to roughly the dimensions of a pig's head. The surrender spread through the remaining men like a released breath. 1 kneeling figure, then 3, then 20, then all of them. The men of Tang Village came together from the hillsides and the alleys and the stone houses where they'd been waiting, and they looked at what they had done, and they began to shout. We won! We won! We won! Uncle Wu stood in the yard with tears on his face, looking across the scattered, surrendered bandits, and then looking at me. He had the expression of a man who had just revised his understanding of what was possible. I gathered 30 people before the fires had fully died. The bandits think we're finished for the day, I said. Their hideout has a small guard and a large supply cache. They left home expecting to be back by tonight. Everyone looked at me. It would be a shame not to visit. The raid on the bandit hideout took most of the night. When we returned to Tang Village in the early morning, the carts were full. Grain enough to last through winter. Silver coins. Supplies the bandits had accumulated from years of raiding. The women waiting at the village entrance handed out bowls of warm water. Uncle Wu put his hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything for a moment. Are you really going to deal with all of this? He eventually asked. I looked at the long line of bound captives, the full carts, the exhausted but upright young men around me. "We need to take them to the county office," I said. "The living ones and the dead." I held up a hand before he could object. Doctor Who was right. The law has rewards for captured bandits, and we need to establish our reputation with the county before someone else defines us first. Uncle Wu nodded slowly. Mr. Hu said the same thing. He said to go early, before word spreads. I collected the long sword from Danu and handed it back to him to keep safe at the village. Iron weapons in the hands of commoners approaching a government office was a specific kind of problem I didn't need. We gathered sticks instead. The people of Li Village and Jiang Village came without much persuading when Ergu explained what we were doing. Seeing the bound bandits and the full carts and the exhausted but unhurt men of Tang Village had a visible effect on how both groups carried themselves. By the time we reached Bayonne County as the sun was setting, our group had grown to nearly 1,000 people. We had started with 3 villages and collected observers along the road. Common people who hated bandits, who recognized what they were looking at, who wanted to be present for whatever was about to happen. The city walls were 6 meters high and old. The gates were watched. County Magistrate Chi Hang Wu rode out in armor with soldiers behind him, having heard that 1,000 people had gathered outside his city. I walked forward to meet him alone, bowed correctly, and introduced myself. I am Tang Fong from Tanya Village in Bayonne County. We have come to collect the lawful reward for capturing and delivering mountain bandits. The magistrate looked at me, then at the line of bound men stretching back down the road, then at the carts, then at the crowd. "Sir," said a soldier sharply, "kneel before the county officer." I looked at the soldier, then at the magistrate, and kept standing,